Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual lunch bunch. Today, Dr. Judy will be talking about caring for someone with dementia. If anyone did not receive the handout, if you could please put your email in the chat, and I will send that over to you. I will also ask that everyone remain on mute while Dr. Judy is speaking, and at the end, we will have time for question and answer. You can also put any questions in the chat, and I will get to them at the end. Dr. Judy, I will pass it over to you.
All right, sounds good. Well, I do want to let you know next month we'll be talking about coping with the holidays. It's the traditional talk we give to prepare everybody for what's supposed to be the most wonderful time of the year, but is really challenging, even for those of us who haven't had a recent loss. You know, there's just too much to do, too little time to do it, and the reality of our fantasy of what the holiday will be like versus the reality of what it is like, you know, they fall short. And so it's a challenging time for everybody. But if you've also lost somebody recently, you know, that void that's left behind by the death of that person will be acutely felt during the holidays. So we're going to talk about that next month, and I welcome you all to join me. I know it'll be on November 4th, our usual time, 12:30 to 1:30. Now, I want to start by acknowledging that much of what I know about being a caregiver for someone with dementia comes from the people who have been part of my caregiver support group. I do a caregiver support group for people caring for people with dementia. It was primarily focused on frontotemporal dementia or degeneration, but we welcome anybody who's a caregiver of someone with dementia. And we meet the first Tuesday of every month. So if you're a caregiver and you're listening, know that that group is offered for free, and you're welcome to become a part of it. But what I want to say is much of what I know, and I'm going to share with you today, really comes from the experiences of the people that have been in my group. And it's really been their willingness to be truly candid about the kind of challenges they face that has allowed me to garner some guidance that I hope to share with you and share with others that are on this journey. And I want to say that the people in my group have won my compassion and my admiration, not because they are saints or superheroes, but because they do this job as the human beings they and the rest of us can only be. They haven't been given superhuman strength. They may muster what seems like superhuman strength, but at the end of the day, they have a human body and a human psyche. So they're exhausted at the end of their day, and they don't go home to a pat cave where there's a butler bringing them cognac. They fall into bed knowing that they have to get up tomorrow and do it all over again, and knowing that they may not even be allowed to sleep through the night. So I want to say that if you're a caregiver, my hat is off to you, because you do this the only way you can do it, which is as a human being, with all the limitations physically and psychologically that all of us have. And that is what merits the respect and compassion we all need to extend to caregivers. But I also want caregivers to know that it is not only okay, but normal to falter, to want to scream, to want to run away, at least once a day, if not 100 times a day. So that's really why caregivers need to be admired, not because they're saints, but because they're humans and they have to do this job anyway, and that's not an easy task. So I am going to talk about the impact being a caregiver takes on people, because I do want us to understand, you know, just how challenging this is. But I don't want people to feel like it's hopeless, because it's not. There are things you can do to make this better. So I'm going to talk about how hard this job is, but I'm also going to really stress and go into the importance of self-care. And I know when you're doing a million things, the idea of self-care seems ludicrous. But even if it's just small mini breaks that you get, we're going to talk about how to do some self-care. We're also going to talk about the importance of learning to ask for help. And many of us are not very good at asking for help. We're the ones that everybody else always asks for help. So suddenly you're in a position where you need to ask for help. So I'm going to talk about kind of what gets in the way of being able to ask for help, because believe me, to the extent that you can ask for help, the better this journey will be for you and the person with dementia. And finally, I'm going to talk about the resources that are out there. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. There are plenty of web pages that have information about how to deal with somebody when they're being combative, or how to get somebody to take medication if they're not willing to take medication. So there's a lot. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of resources out there. And, you know, if we don't get to them all, believe me, they're all in your handout. The mere fact that the Alzheimer's Association maintains a 24-hour hotline is something you really need to tuck away and you know, hold on to, because there is always someone you can reach to talk to. And there are caregiver resource centers throughout the state of Delaware. So we'll get into the resources. So self-care, ask for help, and utilize what's available out there. Those are the things that I really also want to stress. But let's start by talking really about just how challenging this is. Right now, about 16.1 million people are caring for somebody with Alzheimer's or any of the other dementias. Sometimes people don't understand what's the term dementia. Dementia is more a broad sort of umbrella term, and there's lots of different specific kinds of dementias. Alzheimer's is probably the one you most know. There's also something called frontotemporal degeneration, which is what I've worked with. Those are people that fall into two categories. Either they lose their capacity to speak, they develop aphasia, they can't find their words. The other version is a behavioral variant, which means they lose impulse control. So I knew somebody whose wife, and it comes on earlier than Alzheimer's, whose wife was a police officer and would go into Burger King and eat as many hamburgers as she could put in her mouth at any one time. Loss of impulse control. There's Lewy body dementia. That's actually what Robin Williams had, and it causes Parkinsonian-like symptoms, but it's also characterized by hallucinations. So there's lots of different kinds. The more kind of well-known one is where people just start losing memory, and they used to think it was due to the hardening of the arteries and not enough oxygen getting to the brain, and it was, sort of a cardiac-caused dementia. Now they think it's actually people having mini strokes, but that's another kind of dementia. So dementia is a broader term, and there's lots of specific ones. There's a book called What If It's Not Alzheimer's that details all the different kinds of dementias if you're curious. 40 to 70% of family caregivers have clinically significant symptoms of depression, with a quarter to a half of them actually meeting the diagnostic criteria for major depression. This job is challenging psychologically, very challenging psychologically. Research suggests that caring for somebody with cognitive impairment is probably the most stressful kind of caregiving. Those who care for people with dementia are twice as likely as other caregivers to report substantial emotional, physical, and financial difficulties. So, I don't believe in rank ordering pain. Everybody's pain matters, but this is one of the most challenging forms of caregiving that you can get. It's not quite the same as caring for somebody with cancer, who you can still reason with. You're dealing with somebody who can no longer reason with more often than not. 87% of caregivers are not getting enough sleep, which only makes everything that much harder. Imagine being stretched thin and you're also not even getting the respite of sleep. Caring for somebody with dementia can impact a person's immune system for up to 3 years after they're no longer a caregiver. Think about that. It can impact your immune system for up to 3 years after you've stopped doing the job of being a caregiver. And it increases, of course, the chances of the caregiver developing chronic illness or other medical problems. So, again, this is why self-care is so essential, and why it's so essential that caregivers make sure they're going to all their doctor's appointments and getting all their physicals. And again, I understand it's hard to fit that in, and you feel like, no, this other person's the priority. You cannot be there for the other person with the dementia if you do not take care of your own physical health. So really important to know that. Caregivers who experience extreme stress are known to sort of age prematurely. This does take a toll. And the level of stress can take as much as 10 years off of the caregiver's life. Now, that's a pretty startling and disturbing statistic. I don't think it's inevitable, but I think it really speaks to the importance of, again, self-care, asking for help, and utilizing every resource that is available to you, because it is so challenging and does take a toll. So if you're out there and you're a caregiver, this probably doesn't shock you because you know how hard this job is. Caring for the caregiver is one of the most important but overlooked components of caring for the person with dementia. Family caregivers of people with dementia, and I'm quoting, are often called the invisible second patients. They are critical to the quality of life of the care recipients. Caregivers face, as I've already said, significant physical and emotional risks as caregivers, and if they aren't adequately supported, they will develop problems that can threaten the well-being of the person that they're caring for. So sometimes I can't get caregivers to really stop and think about the importance of their own well-being until I really also explain to them that at the end of the day, it's going to affect their ability to care for this person that they love. So if they won't do it for themselves, then they're really still making the care recipient their priority in life. Well, you know what? Taking care of yourself is an important part of taking care of the person that you're taking care of. There was one study, and it's 160 different dyads of patients and caregivers. They found that the worst caregiver mental health predicted greater patient mortality, even when accounting for other risk factors such as the person's diagnosis or their age or the level of dementia that they have. So the well-being of the caregiver has a direct impact on the mortality of the person they're caring for. And that just says to me, you cannot take care of your loved one if you do not take care of yourself. The authors of that study concluded, and I'm quoting, the burden and stresses of caregiving create heightened risk for poor caregiver mental health, and because poor mental health is linked to higher patient mortality, these findings highlight the importance of caring for the caregiver as well as patients when attempting to improve patients' lives. So I gave this presentation or something like it to a conference of doctors, physicians, and I was saying to them, if you have someone in your practice who has developed dementia, you need to pay attention to the caregiver too. That they are the second patient that often goes ignored, and they pay a very high price for that. Everybody involved, the caregiver and the recipient. In one survey of caregivers, 75% said the single greatest barrier, the single greatest challenge of being a caregiver was the grief they were experiencing. And I've done a whole talk on this. The grief in many ways is more important to address than even the hands-on skills of how to care for somebody who's, declining cognitively. The authors from that one study that found 75% of the caregivers saying, grief is the hardest part of this journey, said that the fundamental challenge faced by Alzheimer's caregivers appears to be a combination of anticipatory grief and ambiguous loss rather than hands-on care. So what they're saying is the anticipatory grief, which is, the person's going to die, that's coming. You know it's a certainty, so you start to anticipate their death. It's normal, it's inevitable. And then there's what we call ambiguous loss, and I think what they mean by ambiguous is the person is still there, but they're not there. There's a lot of contradictory and confusing dimensions to caring for somebody with dementia. So they're physically present, they look like the person you love, but they're not the same person, even more so every day. And that's the part that's also hard about losing somebody to dementia, is this every day a little death. That's a song from Sondheim's Night Music, but every day a little bit of the person disappears. I remember a quote from a kid who said, every day I see my father, he's worse than the day I saw him before, and he's the best he's ever going to be. So that kind of gradual loss of a human being, someone you love, and the grief that goes along with that are really important parts of this journey and need to be addressed. So if you are a caregiver, know that you are grieving and that that's normal and inevitable. And sometimes dealing with that grief is more important than even whether you know how to, do the hands-on transfer of somebody in and out of a bed. That's more challenging. The emotional challenge of losing this person every day is really a big part of what makes this journey so incredibly difficult. Sometimes you're too busy to stop and think about that, but believe me, it's just below the surface, and it is taking its toll. Every caregiver I know starts with a very strong conviction that they can and they will take care of their loved ones. But what every caregiver needs to know is that no matter how strong or your level of devotion is to this person, it's a very taxing responsibility. So you need to know that you're going to be most successful if you get help. You will be most successful if you also make care for yourself a priority. You need to understand that you are going to face difficult and contradictory feelings that are totally normal. You're enraged at the person one day and you love them the next, and that is all part of this process that you'll go through. And you really do need to utilize the resources that are available to you. So if you're a caregiver or someone you know as a caregiver, how can you help yourself or how can you help them? Well, understand, as I've said, and you're going to hear it a million times, self-care is a very important part of the job. It is essential for everyone's well-being. The story they tell about when you're on the airlines and if the masks drop down because the oxygen is going out of the plane, they always say to the parents, put your mask on first, because you have to do that in order to then take care of your children. So it's that same idea. If you're not giving yourself oxygen, you can't take care of the people that are your responsibility. Recognize the early warning signs of stress, like sleep problems and irritability and forgetfulness. I've had people that think maybe they're developing dementia because suddenly they can't remember things. Well, stress really, really affects things like concentration, focus, and our ability to remember things. So you're probably not developing dementia. You're probably just tired and stressed out. You're going to face emotional challenges, like I said, that are as important as the hands-on day-to-day activities. And it's really important to know that you're going to have a real range of human emotions that are perfectly normal. It's really normal to feel angry. Caregivers have a host of reasons to feel angry, from just the daily frustrations, too much work, too little sleep, and too much isolation. It's inevitable that you will feel angry, and please don't tell yourself there's something wrong with you if you feel angry. I'm not saying you can act out the anger. You still have to decide a safe way to express that anger. I don't suggest you hit anybody, obviously, but it's okay to know that you're angry and that it's normal to feel angry. You can go scream into a pillow. You can get in your car and go for a ride and scream at the top of your lungs. You can throw ice cubes against a brick wall. That's one of my favorites. But it's okay to be angry. You have to be responsible for how you express that anger, but let yourself know when you're angry, because it's inevitable. It's a normal part of this process. But again, and this is why I address this right off the get-go, is we live in a culture that expects caregivers to be saints, not humans. But we can't be saints. We are only human. That's the nature of being human, is that we're imperfect. You cannot be human and be perfect, as much as many of us think we can be and we keep striving for it. It's ridiculous. You're a human and you cannot be perfect, and that's liberating and aggravating at times, but it's the truth. Women are particularly taught that it's not okay to feel angry, that that's a bad emotion, whereas men are taught that it's okay to be angry but not be sad. So for men, they may need more permission to be able to express their sadness. So it doesn't matter if your anger is rational, like, of course that person just didn't do that to aggravate you. They have dementia. But it's still aggravating. And you can't just tell yourself, it doesn't bother me because he didn't do it on purpose. It may still bother you. And you may need to go in the other room and scream into a pillow. But don't lie to yourself about how you're really feeling, because that only makes you bury it deeper, and it'll eat you up, and it'll get you when you're trying to sleep at night. Of course you're going to feel angry, even if the person didn't intend to do something aggravating. It's still aggravating. You don't take it out on them. You understand that they don't deserve, retaliation, but you let yourself know that it's inevitable that you're going to feel angry at times. And just saying to yourself they didn't mean it doesn't always make the anger go away. Feelings of resentment can also be taboo, but they're also inevitable at times. It's not difficult to understand why a caregiver would resent feeling that their life has been hijacked by this task of taking care of somebody who's losing their capacity to think. How could you not feel like your life has been hijacked? How could you not have some resentment, even if it wasn't the other person's fault? You're not blaming them. You're not going to scream at them. You're not going to tell them they did this to you, but you might need to go scream in a pillow or write a really angry letter that you never send. But if you don't feel resentment at having to take on this level of responsibility, then you're not letting yourself be real. Find safe ways to express it, but always let yourself know that you're going to feel resentment. Guilt is also almost inevitable. Guilt stems from thinking, I should have done it better. I should have done it with, I should have, could have, would have done it better. And I should have done it only with joy and no resentment. And you know what? That's not real. That's not human. So guilt is often the backlash people feel when they have a moment of anger, or they recognize that they're feeling resentful. They feel guilty for even entertaining the thought, like, I wish this was just over, or I wish I could just strangle this person right now. So we feel guilty. Look, stop. Of course you feel that way. Feel guilty if you act on it, because you do have to take responsibility for your behavior. But you know what? If you get snappy at times and you're short with that person, give yourself a break. You're doing the best you can here, and anybody under these circumstances would be stretched thin and have times when they're kind of snappy and not at their best. But again, that's what causes the backlash, because we think, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. He's not doing it on purpose. Well, he's not doing it on purpose, and it still takes an emotional toll. They're two separate things. The other thing we have to do is we do have to tell the truth about how hard it is to be a caregiver. Few people really get it unless they've been in that position, and few people get it and offer the kind of support that you really need, because unless they've been in that position, they don't understand. Those who have never really been caregivers really don't understand how mind-numbing the experience of constant giving with no free time, no emotional space, and not being able to assume anything. Like, if I tell him to stay here and I'll be back in 5 minutes, that he'll remember I'm coming back in 5 minutes. Not being able to take such basic things for granted is mind-numbing. It is so difficult and so hard to wrap your head around. We assume we can rationalize things with people. We assume we can talk things through with people. But when people lose their capacity to think, you can't. And that is a very hard thing to make peace with. And of course, many caregivers feel very lonely. because even if they're having contact with people, they may be feeling like they're living in a world different from everybody else's world, and the people don't really understand them. And we do have situations, I've heard it time and time again, where friends and family do pull away. Sometimes because they don't know how to be helpful. And we're going to talk about that. But sometimes people do pull away, and then you feel even more alone. And sometimes you can't take advantage of social opportunities because you don't know how your loved one will behave if you bring them along. Obviously, if you can get some respite so you can go by yourself, that's a good thing. But these are all the reasons people become so isolated as caregivers, which certainly doesn't help. The inability to take certain things for granted, I think, is one of the most maddening components of caring for somebody with dementia. We really take for granted that we can reason with the people in our lives, and that they'll remember things 2 seconds after we walk out of the room. And when you can't make any of those assumptions, because they may put the mail in the icebox, or they may put their dirty clothes in the bathtub, that is exhausting in a way that you don't understand unless you've lived with it. But just not being able to take for granted the most basic kind of ways in which we interact with people. So you can't assume that, things will be where you put them. People with FTD particularly like to play with things that can push buttons on, like the remotes. But they may also, so they break a lot of remotes, or they may put the remote in the refrigerator, So you can't assume that things are going to be where you left them, or in even a logical place. You can't assume the person really understands what you're saying. You can't assume that they're telling you the truth, because they may not really understand what they're saying. And all of these things are, very difficult to deal with. You can't even assume they'll stay in bed at night. For a lot of people, that's when it becomes almost impossible, if you're being a full-time caregiver and don't have much support, to keep doing it, because you're not even getting sleep at night. So there's just so much that you cannot take for granted, and you don't realize how much you do take those things for granted in your everyday interactions with people until you can't. And then it's like living in the twilight zone. It turns your world upside down. So it's also hard not to be troubled by an endless string of worries, from financial to what am I going to face when I get up tomorrow. In addition to realistic fears, there's always this vague sense of things being out of control, or on the brink of being out of control, because you're just running to keep it going, and it always feels like it's just teetering on being out of control. And so sometimes, for those of us who don't like feeling out of control, we make ourselves even more anxious, because we try to anticipate everything that can possibly happen, so that we see it coming before it happens. And that just adds to our sense of anxiety, but it's our way of trying to feel in control in an out of control situation. Unfortunately, it just tends to make us more anxious, and you can't anticipate every possibility. In some ways, the best attitude is, I will deal with it as it comes. But for those of us who like to see the problem coming and head it off at the pass, that's a hard way to adapt to chaos, and very counterintuitive. It's also really hard not to feel defensive when other people tell you maybe a way they think you could do it better. Anybody who is stretched thin does not want constructive feedback. It is not a time when you're open to hearing that. The other thing that happens a lot, and I hear this all the time from my caregivers, is, the person, somebody comes to visit, and the loved one can kind of sustain seeming pretty normal for a while. They can't sustain it for very long, but they can sustain it long enough for that visit. And so people, as they're walking them out the door, your sister might say, well, he doesn't seem so bad to me. And that is just so crazy making for the caregivers. And the caregivers want to say, okay, you want to stay for about a week and I'm going to go take a vacation? Then they'll understand that their loved one can, depending on their level of decline, can sometimes kind of pull it together for a little while, which is maddening, because then your guests and your friends and family are like, I don't know, he seems kind of like his old self. Believe me, if they were there all day, they would know better. It's okay to start grieving now if you're a caregiver. You're not betraying your loved one by letting yourself know that they're going and they're going to die. And it isn't just grieving that they're dying, it's grieving that parts of them are already dying in front of you. You are already losing them. That's the part I find hardest to wrap my head around. Here's somebody that you've spent your whole adult life with, your loved one, your partner, and they're just disappearing a little bit every day. And you want to turn to them and say, oh my God, I'm in this terrible situation and it's so difficult. But the person that you would turn to is the person that's the cause of your stress and worry and loss. So it isn't even that you're grieving their death, you're grieving the everyday little death. You're grieving all the losses. You know, they used to be able to cook or they used to be able to help in the kitchen and they can't do that anymore. It's all those losses, those cumulative losses. I also want to say the lack of privacy can be crazy making. People, especially when they're developing dementia in the early stages, they're anxious because they know something's wrong. They know their mind isn't working as well as it used to. And so they may simply want to latch on to you, you know, and really hold on tight. And they want more contact than they used to want. And that can be crazy making when you're needing more emotional space because everybody needs some emotional space. And caregivers get very little of this. A lot of times when people get respite that comes into the home and, you know, so the caregiver can go out and run errands. But caregivers say to me, sometimes I wish somebody would come and take them out of the home so I can just putz around my house a little bit. I can just do the things I do around my house without having to think about the fact that there's somebody else who might need my attention and guidance. So, you know, the lack of emotional space also takes a toll. Many caregivers feel like they're like the last soldier standing when they in fact need a whole army of people to help them. Um, but it can be difficult to find help, and unfortunately, you may often feel like you're the last one standing. And all of this, however, is worsened by the fact that we don't feel comfortable asking for help. We were taught you should be able to do it yourself. You shouldn't need to ask other people. And I'm going to go through some of the things people tell me about why they don't want to ask for help and challenge you a little bit on that. But worse, all of this is made harder by the fact that you may be facing it too much alone. Sleep deprivation obviously is the other thing that makes this job so much harder. It leads to mental fatigue, it leads to physical problems, it leads to irritability, and just complete and utter depletion. And the knowing that you have to get up tomorrow and do it all over again is tough. And that exhaustion is really kind of soul numbing. You just shut down awareness of your own needs and feelings. It's too hard to pay attention to those because they're not getting much airtime, and so we sort of numb ourselves out. And just kind of keep, you know, going straight forward with our head down. You know, we're not aware of, we're being affected by our feelings, we're being affected by our needs being neglected, but we're not even aware of it because we're just numbed out and working as hard as we can. I want to say that everybody feels overwhelmed by this task. The tasks of caregiving are endless, and that is why no sane person should strive for perfection as a caregiver. It is impossible. You know, even if you had an entire village helping you, you could not achieve perfection, and most of us do not have a village, which is what we need. No, as a caregiver, everybody feels overwhelmed. Nobody feels like they're totally on top of things. Nobody feels like they're doing the best job possible because you simply can't. It's just too overwhelming. You're too tired. Knowing how to prioritize tasks is also very challenging, and if you have somebody in your life who wants to be a source of support, that might be a job you can sort of ask them to help you with. What are some of the, you know, how can you structure and prioritize your day? And that could be something somebody can help you think through because that's hard to think about when you're in the midst of it. You know, insurance companies and those phone loops that you have to deal with have caregivers that are so exhausted, and then they're on these phone loops for 30, 40 minutes, and it just makes them want to pull their hair out. Another issue that gets complicated if the caregiver is taking care of their partner is the whole issue of sex. You know, when you're a caregiver to a partner with dementia, it's normal to see that relationship in a very different light. So for some, the role of the caregiver feels more like that of a parent than that of a partner. And this is bound, obviously, to impact things like your feelings about being intimate. And that's a whole other topic we could spend a lot of time on. I just want to acknowledge it for the caregivers that are out there to know that, yes, this is another area that gets affected and is complicated to deal with. So burnout's almost inevitable. No one can juggle this many demands on so little sleep and so little time for themselves. But it is all the more reason why it is essential to focus on your own feelings and needs. And again, one of the most important feelings to focus on is your grief. Anticipatory grief has been shown to be independently associated with caregiver burden. So it is the grief that makes this job hard. So even if you just give yourself 5 minutes to sit and write in a journal, 5 minutes about what you're losing, about what you're sad about, that alone will help you. There's a guy Pennybacker, I think is his name, who studied journal writing and found that people who wrote about their feelings for 15 minutes 3 times a week had better measures of psychological and physical health. So even if you just take 5 minutes, and if you can 15 minutes, to write about your feelings in a journal twice a week, you'll be doing something really good for yourself. Um, because believe me, the grief is one of the hardest parts of this job, even more than some of the behavioral problems that you're gonna face. And high levels of pre-death grief can lead to complicated grief after the person dies. So it's really important to address and talk about your grief now, so that you don't end up with more complicated feelings afterwards. Um, and it is found that chronic grief does increase psychological morbidity. That's from a study. And even suicidality in Alzheimer's and related dementia caregivers, conditions that can persist even after the care recipient has died. Psychological morbidity just means psychological problems, depression, anxiety. There's a greater likelihood, obviously, because you're experiencing chronic grief. And again, people can't fix your grief. You've heard me say this many times. You need to say to your friends, there's no magic words. You can't say something that's going to make this all better. But if you sit and you listen to me, I am less alone. And that in and of itself is the greatest gift you can give me. You're going to feel grief throughout the way. Tell your friends. You just need them to listen. A lot of people don't want to burden their family and friends, but they only feel that they're burdening them because they forget that they can just say to their family and friends, look, there's no magic words. There's nothing about dementia you can make better. You can't fix this. But again, if you'll just listen, I can just tell you honestly everything I'm going through, and you just be a loving presence for me, I will be less alone, and that will make it so much more manageable. So educate your family and friends about what you need. And if you're a friend of somebody who's a caregiver, I understand it can be hard to sit with that powerlessness, knowing that there's nothing you can do to make this all better for them. But platitudes or kind of false reassurances, it'll be okay, it's not that bad, they only invalidate what the caregiver is going through, and also the patient in the early stages when they do still understand what they've been diagnosed with. So the platitudes, we fall back on them because we don't know what else to say, but that's not what people need. Better to say, I can't even begin to imagine what you're going through. Or my heart goes out to you because I can only imagine how tough this can be. But I'm here and you can talk to me anytime. So, Sarah, you coming in here for some reason? Let me see. All right, my screen just popped up and blocked my presentation. Okay, so tell people that they can listen, and that alone is one of the greatest gifts, because it is very hard, especially because we have this crazy notion of being a saint, for people to be able to say just how hard something is. And again, if you're the listener, just say, oh my God, that sounds so tough. Just validate what they're feeling. And then they're less alone with it, and normalize it. Of course you're angry. Who wouldn't be? Those are simple things, and they mean everything to the caregiver. Men particularly need permission to feel and know that being stoic isn't what's helpful. Barry Jacobs wrote an article called Why Male Caregivers Shouldn't Hang Tough. I'm going to quote what a patient said in that article. When I tried to be a pillar of strength, it created problems for us. I learned that when I shut off my feelings, then she felt shut out. He goes on to explain that while men may think they are protecting their loved ones, their silence shuts off communication and well springs for their relationship. Further, a tight rein robs them of the flexibility necessary for adapting to the caregiver's myriad and sudden changes. So that kind of rigidity and holding tight to the reins make it harder for you to roll with the punches. But more importantly, what they're saying is that when you don't say how you're feeling because you want to spare your loved one your feelings, the truth is then you're shutting them out. And if they're still cognizant and able to talk to you, it's better that you be able to have real conversations with them. And that might include saying, I love you so much, and it is killing me to see what you're going through. Or, I love you so much, and yeah, of course this is hard because I do love you. But don't shut the person out. Don't think strong and silent is really the gift you want to give. That's the thing we put on men. Be strong, take care of everything. But the reality is, if that person's on the other end of this, they want somebody who can say, I'm so sorry and this is so awful. They want somebody who doesn't shut them out. They don't want that. They want the rock at times, when they need to cry and be held, but they also want you to be candid and open with them to the degree you can in the earliest stages. So I just thought that was a really important article and an important piece of information to pass on. Try to turn down the volume on the negative self-talk. The National Institutes of Aging suggests using some of the following positive messages when you're being too critical of yourself. I'm doing the best I can. What I'm doing would be hard for anybody. I'm not perfect, and that's okay. I can't control everything that happens, and sometimes I just need to do what's going to work in this moment, even if it isn't the best option, because some days you just got to do what you got to do. It's absolutely essential for you to get support, and I know that can be challenging, and partly it's because people disappear, and so I think trying to reach out to people and give them some idea how they can be helpful can really make a difference. Research conducted at NYU found that the people who got support had significantly fewer symptoms of depression and stress and the better physical health. And the study also found that caregivers were able to keep their relatives with dementia home a year and a half longer when they had help and support. Don't wait until you're so burned out. Get help and support now. So let's talk a little bit about why people find it hard to ask for help and maybe give you some other ways of looking at it. People may believe that everybody else is too busy with their own lives to help. Well, the truth is, ironically, people long to know their neighbors and to feel important in other people's lives, to be helpful and to be part of something bigger. But due to our general reluctance to ask for help, our neighbors, our family, our friends often don't even know that we need help, let alone how to give that help. But the reality is most people, if given a specific task or asked to do, an hour of sitting with, or 2 hours sitting with your loved one watching television, 9 times out of 10, most people would be glad to do that. And it isn't going to be as much of a burden. You're feeling so burdened that you project that onto other people. But when you give people a concrete kind of task in a way they can help you, they probably won't feel burdened. They'll feel good about the fact that they were able to do something for somebody, and they're not going to be burdened by making a casserole once a week for your family, or sitting with your loved one, or taking library books back, things like that. If you keep a running list of things that people can help you with, this was put out by caregiver.com. They said, on your refrigerator, keep a running list of things you need help with. Toilet keeps running, I can't turn it off. Need somebody to get some extra groceries, needs these library books taken back. Keep a running list, so when you talk to people, you can say, here's some options. A lot of people, if they're already going out grocery shopping, they're not going to mind if you ask them to pick up a few other things for them. I had a client who would put a big sign outside of her house. It was a small community, and she'd say, anybody going to the grocery store, we need milk and bread. And 9 times out of 10, somebody would bring her milk and bread. So, a lot of times if you give people options, they can find something they really can do, and they wouldn't even mind doing it, like sitting with your loved one for 2 hours watching television. Don't sell people short. Most want to help but have no idea what to do, and they feel so inadequate in the face of such a daunting, diagnosis that they'll just pull away because they don't know what else to do. But it can be very helpful if you give them specific tasks. Another worry people have is that others won't do as good a job as I would, and the truth is they may not. But you know what? At some point, having one less thing to do is going to be far more important than whether they did it exactly the way you would have done it. Some people think, well, my situation isn't bad enough to warrant asking for help. The truth is, the sooner you start asking for help, the better you will be able to be there for your loved one. The sooner you start asking for help, the better your support system will be when you do need to draw on them even more. And my experience is that most people minimize how burned out and tired they already are. And they're like, no, I can keep going. And I'm going to wait till, it's really bad, then I'll ask for help. Don't do that. It probably is already really bad. And the truth is, the sooner you start, the better you're going to have a support system in place. If you ask early on, you're going to reduce the risk of you being burned out, and it'll create better opportunities for you to still have quality interactions with your loved one. Some people think asking for help is a sign of weakness. Baloney. The truth is, for most of us, being able to ask for help takes more courage than trying to do it on our own. So the reality is, it actually isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength to be able to ask people for help. And it is the wise and strong person who allows others to help them. And the last thing people often say to me is, I don't know what to ask for. Sometimes you don't know what to ask for because you've been so tuned out to your own needs and feelings that you're just not thinking about that. But sit down with maybe a close friend or a family member and think about things and ways in which people can help. Sit down and make a list of all the people who could possibly help. Even people who live far away, even people from different generations. The people who are younger than us, they can do some of the computer stuff that could be helpful. People who live in Arizona can still make phone calls for you. They can call, the insurance companies for you. They can call the Alzheimer's Association and get an answer to a question you have. So even people of different generations and far away can help. Think about friends, think about coworkers, think about neighbors, members of your church. I know during COVID in my neighborhood, we would see people out walking their dogs. We'd all be on the other side of the street from each other. But, it was so natural to just yell out to somebody, if you need anything, just holler. And I feel like our neighborhood has gotten closer as a result of that. The fact that we also do a Halloween doggy parade helps, because we put in something in everybody's mailbox and invite them to bring their dogs and cats or sit out on their yards and watch the parade go by. And so we've gotten to know each other more. And I think, people miss the good old days when neighbors knew neighbors. And, I think if you really paid attention during pandemic and you had opportunities to reach out to other people, I was really struck by how much caring and good-naturedness there was between people, and I think we all long for feeling like part of a community. So, there are these free web pages, and believe me, you don't have to be real computer savvy. They're very user-friendly, but you probably have a 10-year-old in your family who can do it, that allow you to, there's one's called Lots of Helping Hands, the other one's called the Caring Bridge, and what you can do is you organize the things you need help for. So you can say, I need somebody to take me to a doctor's appointment, or him to a doctor's appointment, on Tuesday. And you can list, I could use help getting some extra groceries. And people can sign up for different tasks. So you can create schedules. You can create updates so people know how your loved one is doing. And you can list tasks, and people can sign up to do them. And it's a really concrete way to build a support network. And it is not daunting when people look up and look on the webpage and say, oh, they need somebody to take John to the doctor's on Tuesday. I can do that. So it's a way to organize the care that you need, and it's very user-friendly, and I would say at least take a look at it. Because, again, learning how to ask is going to be one of the most important skills you can develop. Even people far away can help. Even younger generation can help. I know we're going to be running out of time, so let me see what I want to just focus on here. Really important to take care of legal matters as soon as possible. Critical that you have the person who's developing any kind of dementia sign legal and financial documents while they're still capable of doing that. Like, you need a durable power of attorney, you need a healthcare proxy. That's somebody who will make decisions when the person can't make their own decisions, advanced health directives, things like that. You can talk to lawyers who specialize in elder law. There is a good group here in this area called Procino, Wells, and Woodland. I have the information in the handout. They can help you protect assets, because at some point, if your loved one needs to be, in a facility, you're going to want to. You probably won't be able to. If you can afford to pay for it, you're lucky. If you can't, then you probably have to find a way to qualify for Medicaid, and that means, spending down your assets. And you think, well, I'll just give it to my son, or I'll put it in a trust. Medicaid looks back 5 years. So especially if you're in the early stages of this, you might really want to talk to an attorney, because there may be ways to protect those assets now, before you hit that, so that they fall outside of that 5-year look back. It's complicated. So you're really going to want to talk to a lawyer. There's a very good living will called, that's put out by Aging with Dignity, which is called The 5 Wishes. You can buy it for $5 on their webpage. There are, I don't know, I was trying to find somebody who could tell me whether this program still exists, but there have in the past been vouchers for free legal assistance. You can get it usually through one of the cheer centers that gives you a certain amount of money to spend on a lawyer to do things like help you draw up the wills. But even Legal Aid provides free legal assistance as part of their elder law program, and it's not income dependent, but they will help you with very simple things like power of attorney, advanced healthcare directives, and things like that. You can find out more about it, advanced healthcare directive at the webpage. I have that. Also, now start doing something that I've told people to do in the past. Organize certain papers and put them in a safe place, like the insurance policies, like the living trust, like your living will. And make sure you know where they are. Organize that stuff now. If you want to have a DNR, means do not resuscitate. If your loved one, if you've decided that you don't want to resuscitate, if their heart stops, there's forms that you have to have filled out. The hospitals have them, but there's also one you can have in your home for emergency personnel. And in Delaware, it used to be called the DNR, but now it's called something like DMOS, Delaware Medical Orders for Scope of Treatment. There's a free one you can download. Again, it's all on the handout. Stay connected to people. It's easy to get isolated. Some situations you can bring your loved one, and some situations you can't. It's usually necessary to educate people about what to expect, and they'll be grateful to get that education. So you can say, look, my loved one might not remember your name or know who you are. Don't take it personally, but they will remember how you treat them. That's what they say about people with dementia. They may not remember the details of who you are, but they will remember how you make them feel. So just to be with the person and interact with them with kindness, or just to sit with them so they're not alone, they will remember that. There was a woman who would visit her mother on a fairly regular basis, and her mother stopped knowing who she was, but she knew she was the woman who brought ice cream, and that made her very happy. So, they'll remember how you make them feel, so you don't have to have anything more than a kind attitude. And anybody can muster that. Focus on what you can change. Don't put a lot of effort into things you can't change. That's going to be frustrating at times, but there's no point in banging your head against the wall. When you encounter difficult situations, think about brainstorming ideas for how to deal with them with your friends or family members. They might be able to think outside of the box in the way that you can't because you're so immersed in it. You're not going to encounter problems that haven't been encountered already by many other caregivers, so look online. You do not have to reinvent the wheel, and utilize the existing resources. As I said, Alzheimer's Association has a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week hotline. Take advantage of it, and person doesn't have to have Alzheimer's. One last thing I want to mention is music is really helpful for people who are developing dementia. There's an incredible documentary called Alive Inside. This social worker, Dan Cohen, came up with the idea of putting music in headphones on MP3 players or iPods. I don't know exactly how you do all that, but they would create individualized music lists based on the person's age. They would know what music would appeal to them, or because it turns out that the part of the brain that's associated with music and creativity is one of the last things to be affected. So they show, and I've got you a link to it in the handout, this man, he's all hunched over, and his daughter comes in, and he doesn't know who she is, and he's just totally out of it, and they put the headphones on him, and he sits up, and he's snapping his fingers, and he's like, this is a man who could barely communicate, he's like, that's Cab Calloway. When I was a kid, my brother and I used to sneak in the theater to hear him, and he's snapping his fingers, and they say, what do you like about the music? It's the love, it's the love. You will be surprised how enlivening music can be, because it taps into emotion. They showed one woman in Canada who was just developing dementia, and it was very scary for her to go out into the world. But if she went out with her headphones on, playing music that she associated with positive experiences in her life, she said, I feel like I have wings and I can fly. Watch the documentary. You can see it probably on Netflix. You can also buy it if you want to on Amazon. It's probably only about $20. And there are programs around here, and their web pages include how to create a playlist. I think the Music and Memory Foundation has songs that you can download. Oh, it's the Alive Inside Foundation. Has songs you can download based on the person's age. And really check that out, because we have so many things that deaden people in the nursing homes. That's what one person says in the video. But we don't know how to enliven people. And time again, they're discovering that putting headphones on and allowing people to listen to the music of their era brings back memories, they communicate, and they come to life. Think about it. There's two other things I want to tell you about. There's a book called Creating Moments of Joy by Jolene Bracken, and it's ways you can engage with somebody who has got memory problems and concentration problems, creating moments of joy, little things. And she's got her own webpage, which includes a list of things you can do, and there's an interview with her. And take care of yourself. I'm not going to go through all this, but at the end of your handout, you'll see some suggestions for refueling psychologically, socially, spiritually, physically, things you can do to help yourself feel better. So let me stop by just giving you a few quotes, and then I have to take questions. Alzheimer caregivers Ride the world's biggest, fastest, scariest emotional roller coaster every day. Sometimes it may take more courage to ask for help than to act alone. What I would say to my dad on a bad dementia day, we do better when we work together. I needed his help to be able to help him. So sometimes you can tap that person's desire to work with you. Only another caregiver understands that going to a grocery store is like a mini vacation. That what running on empty really means. The resentment, frustration, love, loneliness, anxiety, and fear that are normal and to be expected. And only another caregiver knows how much what it feels like to be depended upon all the time. Look at the end of your handout. There are beyond the references. There's the Lots of Helping Hands thing. There's information about what the Delaware Aging and Disability Resource Centers provide. There are caregiver resource centers in every county, so check that out. And there's just a whole lot of other information and support groups. I do a support group the first Tuesday of every month at my house here from 4 to 5:30. You're welcome to join. It's a free group sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association. But there's online caregiver groups if you're too busy and can't get out of the house. So there's also respite programs that may give you a chance to take some time off and bring somebody in to take care of your loved one. There's benefits check places. There's a web page you can go to that lets you look at whether you're getting all the benefits you're entitled to. If your loved one is a veteran, it's quite possible that you can be paid for being their caregiver. So check out all of that. That's really important stuff. And let me come back. I know I threw a lot at you, but make sure you do have that handout because it's got a lot of resources that can be very helpful.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining today's Lunch Bunch. Delaware Hospice is here for you. For any resources, please visit us at www.delawarehospice.org.